In our previous episode, after everyone got a front row seat to our boy's real strength, their jaws practically hit the floor. Even Tan Zhongyue couldn't take a single hit from him. He was like a wolf let loose in a flock of sheep, knocking out martial saints left and right like it was nothing. However, they were still martial saints, so they reacted quickly. They summoned their martial avatars in a flash, thinking that'd turn the tide, but our boy shattered them all like they were made of glass. Everyone froze, gulping nervously, eyes locked on the man floating above like some final boss. Lu Sheng let out a cold chuckle, looking unimpressed. However, that mocking smirk on his face lit a fire under the crowd. They snapped, yelling to kill him, and finally decided to gang up on him. Lu Sheng, meanwhile, notes how they finally figured out the whole team-up idea. Until now, they'd been coming at him one by one. He suggests it's about time they stop being so politely ridiculous. But even as a group, he declares they're still going to get crushed. As the two sides clashed, each blow sent a martial saint flying. They try to go all out, but it doesn't help. One by one, they're getting stomped, and deep down, they all start thinking the same thing. There's no way to win this. One guy totally snaps and grabs Harold by the collar, cursing up a storm, demanding to know who the hell this guy really is. Harold, meanwhile, just shook his head. He insists he doesn't know, tells them not to ask him, saying he's the weakest among them anyway. Meanwhile, our boy continues to mock them and says they're all too weak. Aren't they supposed to be 9th-level martial saints, adding that they're all useless? The words hit a nerve and frustration is written all over their faces. Then one of them, raging, pulls something out of his pocket, swears he's going all in, and downs it in one go. Suddenly his body swells, veins bulge and eyes turn red, but he holds it together and launches himself at Lu Sheng. This time he actually connects. A hard punch landed on our boy, and he got sent flying and crashed into a massive boulder. He wasn't seriously hurt, but it's been a while since he felt pain from a punch. He laughs low, saying this pressure is exactly what he wanted. There's no anger in his eyes, rather quite the opposite. His eyes light up, then he smiles, looking all excited. He shouts at them again and calls them trash, just to rile them up. And it works. They're done playing nice. Everyone pulls out their energy crystals, ready to burn some of their own lifespans if they have to. They don't care anymore. They're going all in. Energy explodes around them, and they all charge. One by one, they land their punches. It looks like Lu Sheng is finally being overwhelmed, knocked around like a rag doll, blow after blow, until he's kicked hard into the ground. However, as the dust settles, Lu Sheng stands up, still smiling. Just then he concentrated his immortal cells into one place, and a fire burned on his chest, spreading outwards, flames growing bigger and brighter. The others look up, stunned to see he's completely unharmed. Meanwhile, our boy mutters to himself, "This is it. This is the pressure he's been craving all along." Then he takes a deep breath, flexes hard, and just like that, it's like he gone full Super Saiyan. A monstrous surge of invisible energy blasts out from him in all directions. The martial saints try to hold their ground, but some are already being flung away. And even now, none of them have a clue what's really happening. A massive surge of energy tore across the island, wild and unstoppable. Up above, the sky lit up with a giant circular pattern. And right at the center of it all was our boy standing alone in the sky. The golden patterns covering his body began to crack and fall away. He murmured to himself, saying he'd finally broken through. Arms wide, head tilted back, eyes closed just to enjoy the moment. Then came the declaration, quiet, but shaking everyone to their core, saying he had finally reached the peak of humanity. No one could even keep their eyes open anymore, not with that overwhelming aura pressing down on them. Still, even without looking, they could feel Lu Sheng had stepped into the 9th level. And if he could nearly wipe the floor with them at 8th, then 9th level must have meant absolute carnage. Monster. That was the only word that fit. They realized that if they didn't run now, there might be no later. Meanwhile, the military marshals were practically losing it. One of them spoke with a trembling voice, saying that was the real God among men. Even the bald marshal was mumbling the same words. Meanwhile, the central marshal couldn't take it anymore, even dropping to his knees, tears streaming down his face, calling Lu Sheng their true god of military. Lin Zhengyue, meanwhile, had already fled. She had been watching the whole thing. And even now, she didn't pull any desperate tricks like swallowing an energy crystal. This force, this pressure, she couldn't even describe it. Her mind was basically screaming as there was no way she could beat Lu Sheng. What's odd is that she didn't feel fear, more like admiration, like she was watching history happen right in front of her. Maybe this moment marked the real turning point for their planet. Maybe this was the start of a whole new era, and the person leading this new era could only be Lu Sheng. As he slowly descended, everything seemed to settle. He looked calm while feeling this new power and the immortal cells running through his body. But to him, this was still just the beginning. He reflects on it all and admits that these so-called ninth-level martial saints right now were far too weak. Even when more than 20 of them fought together, no one seemed to give him the challenge he wanted. Turned out, he had deliberately held back his strength. End of the day, he wasn't aiming to kill, but the fight felt more like he was playing a game than fighting for his life. There was no real sense of danger, and that in itself left him quietly disappointed. He remarks that even if he just stood there and let them wail on him, they probably still wouldn't be able to kill him. Back when he only had 22 immortal cells, he could take a strike from a 10th level, and right now, he was sitting on nearly 300. If a 9th level could still manage to kill him, then it had to be a joke. And yet, he couldn't shake the feeling that he was still only halfway to level 9 himself, because his martial body and psychic power hadn't fully fused yet. Stroking his chin, he slowly looked up toward the stars, thinking he would probably have to put his hopes in that guide who's supposed to be arriving soon. Lu Sheng then slowly approached the military side. No one said a word. It was actually Lu Sheng who broke the silence first, asking if he could return with them later. The central marshal froze for a second, then quickly agreed. Of course he could. The guy was over the moon. After 200 years of grinding and waiting, they'd finally hit the cosmic jackpot. Just then, someone stumbled toward Lu Sheng, calling his name. He turned around and saw Cumberland trying to catch his words. He admitted Lu Sheng was strong, no question there, but he worried that if he took all the energy crystals for himself, it might bring disaster, not just to him, but maybe even doom the entire planet. He suggested Lu Sheng think it through. Our boy gave him a flat glance, then replied that if the guide really wanted him, then let the guide come find him personally. He assures Cumberland there'd be no fallout for them when that time comes. Cumberland froze. He opened his mouth like he wanted to say more, but he kept it to himself. Still, something twisted in his chest, a creeping and rather terrifying thought. What was he planning exactly? There's no way, right? That's the guide they are talking about. Meanwhile, the martial saint's eyes were fixed on Lu Sheng as he walked away, with the massive energy crystals slowly drifting away. In their world, strength ruled above all. And right now, Lu Sheng looked more like a living god than a man. No one in history had reached this level, and no one knew if anyone ever would again. Several hours later, the military had everything ready, fighters and transport planes all prepped and good to go. Then, a sudden voice called out from behind. Lu Sheng turned back only to see Fiona came running. She stopped a little distance away, hesitated, then asked something that had clearly been on her mind, saying she wanted to know his name, his real name which he never told her. Lu Sheng stood quietly for a moment, then gave a light smile. He said it didn't matter, and tells her it was better to forget about him, then added that he already had a fiancée. And with that, he turned and boarded the plane. Soon the hatch was shut. Fiona stood frozen, eyes locked on the sky as the fleet slowly lifted off. Then a single tear rolled down her cheek. Cumberland had come up beside her at some point. He tried to comfort her and said it was better to forget him. The two of them were never meant to be. Fiona didn't say anything right away, but then, with sudden resolve, she looked at her father and told him she knew what she had to do. With that, she turned and walked away. Cumberland called after her a few times, but she didn't look back. He could only sigh. Meanwhile, the remaining martial saints gathered around. One of them pointed out they don't have any energy crystals, asking what should they do now. Cumberland clenched his teeth, let out a cold snort, and said, what else could they do? They'd just have to wait for the guide to arrive, and let that so-called peak of mankind learn what it means to break the rules. Everyone fell silent for a second, but just thinking about the guide filled them with a mix of admiration and a touch of madness. One by one, they started convincing themselves that the guide would definitely help them put Lu Sheng in his place. Then the guide will set things right. Cumberland didn't say much. He just quietly thought to himself, no one escapes the guide's hand. Then the scene shifts. Over in the Eastern Military District, things are much quieter and warmer. At the family estate, everyone's gathered in the kitchen, happily making dumplings. Mom and Dad have aprons on, moving busily around. Little sis is helping too, kind of half working, half complaining. Snowy walks in holding a tray of drinks, telling everyone they've worked hard. The room lights up when they see her. Little sis stretches and mutters that if Mom wanted dumplings, she could have just asked the head chef to make them. Why go through all this trouble? Adding that the chef's food tastes better anyway. But Dad waves that off. Says no matter how good a chef is, it'll never taste like the ones Mom makes. In his eyes, nothing beats Mom's cooking. Sis doesn't buy it, but Mom blushes a little and downplays it, saying it's nothing, just that it's been a while since she's cooked, and she hopes her son gets to eat something homemade when he finally comes back. She jokes that she's out of practice and worries the food might not be as good. Cue some classic old couple banter while the sister just rolls her eyes. Then she turns to Snowy and asks, "When's Big Bro coming back anyway?" It's been over a year. That quiet question makes both parents pause and look at Snowy too. They're all hoping for something. Snowy glances out the window, clearly unsure. She's just about to admit she doesn't know either when her phone starts buzzing like crazy. She grabs it, checks the message, and her whole body jolts. In the blink of an eye, she's sprinting out the door. The others rush after her. Outside, her eyes start to tear up. A huge group has gathered at the gate, and right at the front, wrapped in a general's cape, is Lu Sheng. He smiles and says he's home. Snowy runs straight into him, throws her arms around him, and quietly admits she waited so long. Lu Sheng holds her close and gently tells her he knows it hasn't been easy. Then he looked over to the rest of the family, smiled again, and said he was back. Dad gave him a big smile while Mom's eyes started to glisten, and even the sister couldn't hold it in. Mom keeps repeating, "As long as you're back." Sis, crying through a half-laugh, scolds him for taking so long and demands to know where her present is. Soon enough, Lu Sheng's sitting down with them, sleeves rolled up, helping make dumplings like the rest. Later they all gather in the living room for a proper reunion meal. Lu Sheng watches them, quiet for a moment, and all of a sudden a clarity settles over him. If he was a blade that could cut through the world, then his home would be his sheath. After dinner was done, and under the quiet night sky, Lu Sheng and Snowy strolled slowly through the villa's garden, held each other's hands with fingers laced like it was the most normal thing in the world. Lu Sheng mentioned how he remembered the time they first met. Funny enough, it had been around this same time of year. Snowy gave a soft nod, the kind of response that said a lot without needing words. He pulled her into a gentle hug, saying that in a few days she should take Mom and Dad back to White Lake City, and after he takes care of everything, then it will be time for him to meet Snowy's family. As they leaned in close, Lu Sheng's voice lowered. He suggested it was time for them to settle things between them, for good. Snowy gave a quiet nod, a rare flush of shyness blooming across her face. And then, slowly, they kissed. The scene shifted. Now it was the military conference hall, packed with all the top brass. Every high-ranking officer was there, eyes glued to the giant screen, which was playing scenes from Lu Sheng's battle on Thousand Saints Island. The atmosphere was electric and everyone was fired up. Then the Central Marshal stood up, face serious but eyes burning. He declared that this day would go down in history. After 200 years, their wish had finally come true. Not only had they achieved that, but now the military had welcomed a god, a being who stood above all martial saints. But that wasn't all. The Marshal revealed that Lu Sheng had given him one more instruction, which was to introduce a new body refinement technique across the entire military. That stunned the other marshals. None of them had heard about this until now, and if Lu Sheng was the one pushing for it, then what kind of terrifying technique could it be?